Hi guys, I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. I hope you're all doing well. Let's see how many of you are online. I don't even know how many of you are here yet. Let's have a look. We're going to start shortly. I know some of you will turn up a little late. So let me make sure that I'm on my screen and you can hear me. Let's see. Let's have a look. Fantastic. Yeah, wonderful. I can see myself and I can hear myself. That's great. Okay, excellent. So how many have we got online? I don't even know how many. We've got 202 watching. That's great. It's good to see. Okay, so some of you are saying you can hear me and some of you are saying you're cooked. Whatever that means. I don't know what that means. I'm really, yeah, good. So there's a lot of questions coming in. I put the so I think we've got a timer on the chat, so you can't send too many messages at once. I think use your messages wisely, because I'm not going to be able to look through the hundreds of messages that you send to me. So I'm going to probably go through my stuff, and as we go along, if you've got any questions, you're welcome to ask me. But try to be a little bit kind on me with your messages. Let's try not to put too many general messages in. Okay, we've got some good messages coming in on political ideas. So let me go through what I'm going to do today, and then we can begin properly. And I should really show you something. So while I set my stuff up, sorry, I haven't set everything up today because I was rushing around. Here we go. I'm just going to show you my website. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. So I'm going to, in fact, can I ask you to put in the chat how you came across my channel, or how we came across this? So how did you know about today's session? Like, did you subscribe to my Substack and you found out through that, or was there another means by which you found out about today's? I'm just interested rather than anything else. Yeah, let me know. Just put that in the chat. So yes, your friends, TikTok. Oh, TikTok's working. That's good. That's Nora for us. Nora's been helping me out on TikTok, and so she's the one behind TikTok. Yeah, brilliant. YouTube recommended. Wonderful. Your teacher told you about today. That's good to hear. Some friends told you TikTok. Your mum Googled it. Well, I'm on Google. That's good to hear. So I didn't know I was on Google. Fantastic. Adrian told you. That's really specific, Will. That's good to hear. Adrian told you that. Fantastic. All right, we've got some good messages coming through. Right, second question for you before we begin, because I know we're waiting for a few people to start here. So, second question for you. What are you finding the most difficult at this stage about politics? So what is it? What you struggling with in your revision? Just let me know, and then I will respond to some of that as we speak. Ideologies. Wow. Okay, ideologies. So there's a lot in ideologies. Okay, right. Liberalism, ideologies. Wow, not fantastic. That's interesting. Okay, that's good. Brilliant. I'm just going to send a message to this student. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So this will be recorded, and you will be able to play it back later on. Some students are saying elections, parties. Okay. So it seems like using sources, right? So it seems like there are a number of areas that you find a little tricky, and that's perfectly fine, because I'm going to go through the shortcuts you require for getting this right. So you've got just under a week before your exam. Your exam's next Tuesday. I've got that right. So you've got an exam next Tuesday. and we have to make sure that you're prepared for this exam, and we can get you there. So even if you feel that you haven't quite revised enough, and you haven't quite, reached the peak of your revision, I think today's session will be helpful for you, because hopefully by the end of today, you all should have a focus on how you should revise. Now, I'm going to put an asterisk by what I say next. I'm not telling you that what I'm going to give you next. I have no idea, by the way, Ariane, what cooked even means. Does that mean like you're going to get you're going to lose, or you're going to fail? Is that what cooked means? So my advice to you is that what I'm going to do today is I'm going to focus on the essays you need for you should focus on as a priority. If you haven't focused on these essays, then I would focus on those essays, right? So we've got some Urban Dictionary people here who tell me that cooked means that you're finished. All right. Don't worry, you're not cooked. Ariane, you're not cooked. Don't worry about it. And bro's cooked. Is that how you say it on the streets? Bro's cooked. That means bro's finished. Is that what you say after an exam? um, all right, you've got a morning exam just before the afternoon exam, so fair enough. Fair enough. So you are cooked. Right, so let's carry on. He ate. What does ate mean? I'm not gonna fall into this, but what does ate mean? He ate. Like he ate. You mean he was hungry and he ate? I don't get any of this. I'm from a generation where we spoke properly. Um, okay, you're not cooked. You're just exaggerating. Fine, that's good. 8 is doing well. I'm 8. I would have thought 8 means you're not doing well. Anyway, I'm wasting time here. Valuable time, valuable revision time on your street lingo. Right. So let's start with what I think you should focus on for your exams, right? The essays you should focus on. So I'm going to sort of ignore some of your comments for now. So if you've got a burning comment or question, don't put it in the chat for now. Just leave that question hanging for now. I will then tell you when I'm going to come back to the chat, so you can put your question in, because otherwise I'll miss it. Right. Thanks you, Luca. Right. So let's start with we're going to start with democracy and participation essays. But before we get there, I want to say a few words about how to revise between now and your exam. So the best way to revise between now and your exam, and you may have heard this from me before, is you've got to write full essays, or you've got to write very detailed essay plans. So all of the essays I'm going to flag up on the screen today. So when I flag them up on the screen, you see how I'm flagging them up. When I flag these essays up on the screen today, you've got to go away and not just say, oh, I've got an essay to do on X or Y. You've got to actually write that essay out, right? So we may go through, I don't know, I may say to you today, and I haven't actually counted them, but I may say by the end of today, there are 15 essays, 15 essays you've got to focus on between now and next week. For the mathematicians amongst you, 15 divided by 5, 6, right? 6 days, 5 days, let's say 5 days of revision. So you've got 3 essays per day. Have I got that right? I'm not a mathematician. There are 3 types of mathematicians: those who can count and those who can't. So if you do 3 essays per day, and you focus on those 3 essays, you write them out in full, you write out the detailed essay plans on top of your other revision, I think you'll probably be in a good place. You'll be in a better place than some of you who are panicking at the moment, right? What I wouldn't do now is I wouldn't go through the textbook, right? I wouldn't read a textbook. For me, that's a bad idea. I wouldn't take notes from a textbook. I think that's a bad idea. The best thing you can do between now and now in the exam is you've got to make sure you write these essays out, right? Does it sound good? Right. Now, there are some example essays on my website, and you're welcome to look at those example essays. But what I would say is when you write, the more you write something, the more you read it out, the more you're going to remember it. So the day before your exam, imagine you did manage to write all of these 15 essays, or like half of them, and the rest of them you planned. Let's say you got to that state by the time your exam comes around, right? If you get to that state, then the day before your exam, just open up your folder of essays and read and read and read through them. The more you read something, the more you talk about something, the better you're going to understand it and remember it in your exam, right? So that's, I think, a sure way to revise for this exam. Now, I have got some videos on my website, and I'll show you them at the end. So I have got some. We've been working with students. I think a lot of you have come from that. We've been working with students, or I've been working with students since January on exam revision. So there's a lot of tutorials on my website. So I'll show you how to access them later if you want. But you don't need to purchase anything, quite frankly, to pass your exam. You really need to practice. Don't be that sort of person who thinks that the way to pass your exam is to purchase lots of things, right? You've really got to practice essay questions. I'm going to flag up the essay questions you need to practice. Unfortunately, I can't tell you in this call how to answer those essay questions. So if you find that some essays are tricky in component 1 and you need some help, then I would show you where to access the video tutorials for them. I do have a lot of the plans I'm going to flag up today are in my revision workbook on Amazon, right? So if you go to the front page of my website, alevelpolitics.com, you'll be able to access my revision guide. And I think some of you have probably bought that revision guide, and I think I've found everyone's spoken very highly of it, if I may say so myself. So if you do want access to those plans, then probably it's worth getting that, and that's for component 1 and 2 UK. Okay, I'm going to get on with it because Dar's saying, mate, get on with it. So mate, I'm going to get on with it. Let's talk about democracy and participation. Right, we've had a number of questions on democracy and participation, of course, over the last few years since 2019 when the exam came out. So the last year we had a question on democratic deficit. The year before then, there was a question about rights, and there was this thing about collective and individual rights. The year before that, we had this fairly dodgy question, which I think they never repeat again, but it was a question about you're free to ignore MPs' manifestos and referendums. I don't think you'll get a tricky question like that this year, to be honest, because most teachers complained about the state of their questions. You had a question here about pressure groups and government legislation. So pressure groups versus government legislation in promoting rights. So again, it's a rights question. And then there was this question here at the very beginning about think tanks, lobbyists, and pressure groups. And I think some of you would have probably done this question in class because it did catch a lot of students by surprise when this exam came out, right? So I would suggest that I'm going to suggest the following, right? The essays I'm going to flag up, some of them are actually very difficult, but I'm going to flag up the difficult ones first and then move on to the fairly straightforward ones. The first question I'm going to flag up, I don't think would come up in this. Look, let me rephrase that. I think it can come up because it's a viable question. All I would say to you is that you need to have a viable answer to this question, right? It may not come up. And to be honest, if you ask me, I'm not a betting man, but if you ask me if I was to put any money on whether this question would come up, it will be in the sort of low percentages. But it hasn't come up so far. They haven't asked a question on corporations so far, right? So it would be a question about pressure groups versus corporations. And you've got to make sure you know enough about corporations, because if you remember, they asked a question here about think tanks and lobbyists, but there was a third area, corporations, which they haven't yet asked about. So I was thinking about where could they ask a question about corporations. It will probably be a question like this: corporations versus pressure groups, right? Now, some of you may find, and Maya's made a very good point. What is there to say about this question? Maybe I should say a few words about this. Let me give you, I'm going to flag up. Here's what I'm going to do for this question only. I'm just going to flag up the plan for you, right? I'm not going to be able to do that because I can't stay here all night. And, we spent an entire 2 months looking at all of these plans in detail. And they're all available on the site. But let me just flag up this question. So what I would do is I would talk about insider pressure groups. I would talk about how corporations are important, how companies are important, because they have an importance on the economy. And then I would also talk about corporations and lobbying power. So how companies lobby, right? So let me say that again. Insider pressure groups and versus outsider pressure groups, corporations, companies, and their importance on the economy. And also corporations and their lobbying power, how corporations lobby, in other words, right? And that would be the three areas that I would look at. And now some of you are saying, what is lobbying? What is, and I think, that's a question the answer to that is you probably just need to read up on what lobbying is. But I would probably do that. Right. I'm going to say a few words. In fact, I'm just going to literally spend 2 seconds on each slide so that you can come back to this and just cut and paste or screenshot this. I'm not going to be able to do that for every question, right? So this would be my insider half paragraph, and this will be my counter paragraph. And I've used a particular group called Cage UK, which I think is an interesting group to use in this essay. In my second paragraph, I would start with corporations and their importance on the economy. And then I would counter that by saying that pressure groups actually sometimes are far more stronger than even the strongest pressure groups. And I've got an example here of Starbucks, right? And then I've got a third paragraph on lobbying. And it's a paragraph on how corporations use lobbying in order to get in order for them to have an influence. And then a counter to that is, fine, they do lobby, but there are rules against lobbying in Parliament, right? So these will be my 3 paragraphs. And again, as I said, I'm not going to be able to go through these in any great length, but if you want to go back on the slider, what do they call it? The timeline slider, whatever it's called, you're welcome to do so, and you will you will find out about that. Right. Okay, so brilliant. How are we doing so far? So I'm just going to have a quick look at your questions. Fantastic. That's good to hear. Let's have a look. Great. Okay, I'm going to move on then. Let's then look at this question here. And again, this question here, it's unlikely. No, it's a likely question. No, what am I saying? I think this is quite a likely question. Evaluate the view that the wider introduction of direct democracy will improve the quality of UK's representative democracy. That hasn't come up yet. So we haven't actually had a question. We've had a number of questions skimming the representative. I mean, last year was about democratic deficit, right? And that's a question about representative democracy. But this, they haven't asked a question about direct democracy. There was a question about referendums, but actually referendums doesn't nestle under democracy, the topic of democracy. So I think you could get a question on how does direct democracy improve representative democracy? So this is a question I would suggest you have to revise, right? The different forms of direct democracy. Now, on my YouTube page, I've actually got an answer to this question here, which is a much more difficult question, which in effect tells you can't use referendums in an answer. So evaluate the view that apart from referendums, the introduction of other forms of direct democracy would undermine representative democracy. I have actually got a model answer to that on my YouTube page, so you can just go along to that and you can get an answer to that. Again, I don't think this question is as likely. I think the most likely question is something like this, to be honest. The wider introduction of direct democracy. So you're welcome to look at that. Fantastic. Brilliant. Okay. So that's a second essay that I feel you would find it. Now, I think this is very high on my list of questions that you could get, because although they had a democratic deficit question, last time round, they haven't actually had a question on political participation, right? So I think a crisis of political participation is a good one. And Tom has mentioned, votes for 16-year-olds, and all of that can be raised here, and that's perfectly valid. And some of you are actually writing some, putting some plans together in the notes, and that's fantastic. Just cut and paste those plans, actually. But I think this is a plausible question. I would focus on this question, by the way, right? This is an outside chance. And sorry, I'm flagging some quite difficult questions there, but this is probably an outside chance of a question. Evaluate the view that democratic legitimacy is undermined by the state of UK's representative democracy. Now, the reason why I mentioned this is that democratic legitimacy does appear in the syllabus, in the specification. And it's a word they can use in an exam, right? So you couldn't, it's like when they talked about collective and individual rights. I remember flagging that question up with students and suggesting that they can talk about it. And lo and behold, it did come up in the exam. And so the students who listened to me actually did quite well in answering that question. So you've just got to find a way out of this question. I'll flag up the way out of it. You'd have one section on low turnouts in elections. You'd have another section on membership for political parties. And then there's this third section, which I call democratic pluralism, right? Democratic pluralism. And again, you may not know what pluralism means, but it's another buzz term that's used in a specification. So you may need to be aware of this if you haven't learned it already. So in order to just flag up what democratic pluralism is, I'm going to give you a quick, no, I'm not even going to talk about this, but pluralism is basically the idea that for every discussion within society, there should be a counter view in society, right? So pluralism is where you have lots of pressure groups and lots of media organizations and lots of parties, and they all try to engage in political debates, and they all try to win political opinion, right? And again, I would probably stick to a plan that looks like this. Once you read that, it becomes very clear what democratic legitimacy is. So again, don't get too daunted. I think this is not high up on my list, but I think it's worth I wouldn't write this answer in full. I would probably plan it and make sure I've just got answers to it, because it can come up in the exam, right? I don't think you'll get a rights question this year, because they've had a number of rights questions, but they can repeat a rights question. And if they do, it'll be a question like this: evaluate the view that rights are no longer adequately protected in the UK. So I would probably say that's a possible question. So really, what I'm saying here in democracy is that's quite likely. Again, I can't say for sure. They can repeat a question again, but that's quite likely in Edexcel. I would also suggest that is quite likely as well as a question, direct democracy as a question. And I wouldn't, I would make sure that I just knew how to answer that question there. And I also would make sure I knew how to answer a question on democratic legitimacy, and know what pluralism is, and maybe just make sure you brush up on rights and you know how to answer a rights question. Right, I am now going to go to questions. So are you guys okay with those with those sort of with those focuses? Focuses? Yeah. Good. Okay. It seems like everyone's talking about ideologies here. Am I talking to myself? That wouldn't be the first time. Yeah, I'm going to take one question, which is from Saba. What would a counter to democratic pluralism be? That's a good point. So democratic pluralism is the idea that for every issue in society, every policy or value in society, there is a counter to that in society, right? So if the government wants to cut NHS spending, there are NHS pressure groups that are ready to counter that. There's the media that's ready to counter that. And so the idea is that the more pluralistic your society is, the more ideas that are that you are experiencing within a society, the more you're able to have an enriched democracy. That's the sort of idea. So we need lots of pressure groups. We need lots of contests. We need lots of challenge. We need lots of protests, right? That's what democratic legitimate pluralism means. Now, the counter to that is, although Britain does have some level of pluralism, that's being limited in a number of ways. For example, governments have been curtailing our rights to protest, and you may know that because Suella Braverman and Priti Patel and others have really attempted to limit our rights to protest, right? So, that's a way to destroy, or at least to curtail, democratic pluralism. I think the other point to make is that the first past the post system gives you an illusion that you've got lots of political parties, but the reality is that normally only one political party is going to be able to win a particular election, and so it's not like Germany or in systems where you've got proportional systems. You effectively just have one or two political parties that have the right to form governments, and it's very rare for third parties to be particularly influential in our political system. Also, you could argue that the media is really run by a few corporate elites, and it's a problem. So someone has just said that I should stand as an MP. Well, there's a story here, because I actually ran for parliament once. I don't know if you know that, but I did run for parliament once. Yeah, the bus was late. Yeah, that's a great joke. Okay, so could you remove the timer? It takes way too long, and when you ask the question, I have 30-second timer. Yeah, but if I remove the timer, you guys would just deluge me with lots of spam, and you talk to me about stuff that yeah. That was a joke, guys. Do you get the joke? Why are people still asking? Oh, is there a delay? There's a delay on here. I don't know how to remove that delay. Oh, I should have removed it. I will have to just. The joke is sending me over the edge. Well, I tell you something, Kashfi. If you put that joke in your exam, I will personally pay for your resit. so fair enough. Fantastic. Right. So yeah, I think that's good. Right. So let's move on to parties and the questions I think you should focus on in parties. Someone's asked, has anyone sat the AS paper? I mean, there's no correlation between the AS paper and the A level paper. So don't worry about like trying to find out what's on the AS paper and seeing if that can be carried into A, because there are two different examiners for the two separate papers. So yeah, I don't think that's that important. And someone has used the famous Zhao is a goat. Thank you very much. I prefer lion because I think a goat is a fairly feeble animal, but I think a lion would certainly represent who I am and what I stand for. So yes, Margaret, I have a lot of faith in you. I have absolute faith in you. Sorry, that was a joke. I have absolute faith in you. Right. Rights could come up. Yeah, I think rights can come up. I wouldn't dismiss rights, but I would say rights probably will be down your list. And I think that's good. The franchise questions, extending the franchise, votes at 16, prisoners. That's more likely to come up as a political participation question, right? So yeah, Shill has asked, have I got faith in you? Shill, I've got absolute faith in you. I don't know who you are. I've never taught you. I've never come across you, but I have absolute faith in you, Shill. Don't worry about it. So that's fine. We do have time. We need to get through this, and we need to get through ideologies as well. So I'm going to move on. Parties, I'm far more interested in, because I think parties. I've got a couple of questions I would like to flag, but just to be aware. So last year, there was a question on party funding. The year before, there was this really horrible question on pick and mix. And anyone who hasn't been to Woolworths, and I don't think you're the generation of Woolworths, would not have known what pick and mix is, or some of you would have known, because I hear from students that pick and mix is still a thing when you go to the cinema. But that question would never come up again. There was a question about multiple parties. The emergence of multi-parties means that the UK Westminster electoral system must be changed. So it's sort of like a question between parties and electoral systems or elections. There was this question here again about party funding, and there was a question here about the only parties that matter are the Labour and Conservative parties, right? So what haven't we had so far? Well, we haven't had a Thatcherism question. Evaluate the view that the Conservative Party has moved away from Thatcherism. I think that's a really good question to answer, right? Um, I feel that it can come up. I feel that you should prepare for this question. And actually, if you prepare for this, you'd be able to utilize a lot of the prep in other essays, right? So I would probably talk about policy areas. And what I've done here is I flagged up 3 policy areas: economic policy, social policy, and law and order. I mean, these are probably 3 good policy areas that allow you to talk about Thatcherism. By the way, on social policy, what I mean by that is just sort of, general societal policy. The government has just announced, the education secretary has announced that they're going to withdraw sex and relationship education for everyone under 9 years old, and they're no longer going to allow schools to teach trans rights, right? Now that's quite similar to section, oh, I've forgotten the section, it's in my essay, but it's quite similar to the policy of Margaret Thatcher. I've got it here. So section 28. It's quite similar to section 28, where the Thatcher government, in their neoconservative ways, were trying to utilize the education system to teach a morality, right? So I think that's a great question to be able to answer, and I would probably answer it like that, right? And let's have a look. Okay, great. I think the Thatcherism question is quite easy to answer. And the economic side, there's a lot of good evidence for that, a lot of good pieces of analysis and evidence you can get on the economy. And I've got a full essay on that here. Right. I think this is also possible to come out. In fact, I would probably put my bets on this question if I was a betting man. Not that I am. I don't bet. Never betted in my life. Never even smoked a cigarette in my life, by the way. That's how clean I am when it comes to this. Margaret Thatcher would be proud of me, I feel. Yes, you will be able to watch this when the live finishes, Mohammed. That's not a problem. Okay, so and why are you asking about food tech? What has food tech got to do with anything? This is, we're not talking about soft subjects here, guys. Right. So evaluate the view that major parties agree more than they disagree on policies and ideas. A fantastic question. And I think there's so much to talk about. And I want to say a few words about it, because I probably would talk about economy and welfare. I probably would have talked about constitution, but now I will talk about Gaza, because I think the parties are quite similar on Gaza. And for those of you who attended one of my webinars, one of my YouTube sessions before, I did a lot on Gaza, because I think it's an area where the 2 big political parties actually agree more than they disagree, even though they may give the impression that they disagree. Now, Saba's got a good point. You may want to talk about foreign policy rather than Gaza specifically. But there's a lot to say about Gaza, right? On this. Yeah. Now, Amrin has asked, is it likely for these questions to come up because it's an election year? I don't know. I don't think they think that deeply about questions like, it's an election year or it isn't. I don't think they think like that. So, remember the questions were written, last year? Probably September sometime last year. So, I don't know. Okay, great. The old live is already, it's up. You can go to my website and access it. Okay, so that's also a really important question for you to revise, right? Also, we've got, what have I done? Also, we've got a question here. Evaluate the view that minor parties play an insignificant role in UK politics. Now, there was a question a while back on minor parties. So, plausibly, it may not come up, but they like asking minor parties questions. So you've got to have a way out. You've got to have an answer to this question. And it's not a too dissimilar question to this. So these 2 questions are actually the same. evaluate the view that we no longer have a two-party system in the UK. Right. So remember, there's that question. The only parties that matter are the Conservative and Labour parties. So possibly you could get a rerun of that question and it will be framed like this. So I would just be clear about what a two-party system looks like. Right. I would be clear about that if I were you. Great. Yes. Okay. What else have we got here? Yes, you can get a question about Labour's divisions. Evaluate the view that the Labour Party is internally divided. Evaluate the view that the Labour Party is internally divided. Now, to answer this question, you would need to know about some of the internal divisions within Labour. And I would probably say the economy, I would say public services, and I would scrap Blue Labour actually, and I would talk about Gaza, because Gaza has been a real problem within the Labour Party, a massive problem within the Labour Party. Lots of resignations, lots of people suspended, lots of councillors suspended across the country. There's been in excess of 100 councillors suspended. Labour did really well in the recent council elections, but in particular Muslim constituencies or wards, Labour did really badly. I mean, there was a thing yesterday, and it was a really interesting. I think it was the ITV News said that there's been a massive reduction of votes within Muslim wards and constituencies across the UK, and that can cost Labour in the next coming election. Of course, Jeremy Corbyn is he's been thrown out of the parliamentary party, and again, the likelihood is he's going to stand as an independent. In fact, I think he may announce that today. So yeah, that's the that's something to be aware of, right? Yes. You could also evaluate the view that the current Labour Party has moved away from old Labour. So I think it's a very similar question to that question there. You can use a lot of that content, but it's really about whether the current Labour Party represents the old Labour Party. So I think that's a valid question. And you've got to have an answer to this question: new Labour or current Labour versus old Labour. I mean, there's a question you can be asked whether the current Labour Party is a new Labour Party. But even if you get that question, you're basically comparing Starmer's Labour with old Labour, right? And or Blair's Labour, if that was the question. And I would say that it's a fairly similar question, but it's a good standard answer. How are we doing so far? So I'm just going to go back to my questions. Are you guys doing okay? Do you know? Yeah, you has asked the question. I thought I'd be marked down if I talk about Gaza or Palestine. No, you just got to make sure you're not preaching, right? So if you talk about it as a factual thing, you can talk about it. There's no problem with that, because it's a reality. It's out there. Why wouldn't you be able to talk about something like Palestine or the conflict or Gaza? That's that's perfectly reasonable to do so, as long as you don't come across as if you're pushing a particular view, an activist view, because it's not. An exam isn't there for activism, but talking about it, perfectly fine, and you should do that. And someone said, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn, fine." Yeah, and Natalie Elwick says it all. I think that's a good. Sky has made a very good thing, and someone says, "Who's Jeremy Corbyn?" Yeah, such is life. Right. Fantastic. So how are we doing so far? Everyone doing well with parties. I'm just looking at whether my stream is still up, and I think it is up. That's really good. Right. Yeah, so that's it. So let me summarize political parties. I think the likelihood is you'll get a question on either the difference between political parties, the divisions within a political party, so difference between political parties, the divisions between a political party, or a party and its past. These are the three big versions of questions you can get: a party and its past, the divisions within a political party, or the divisions between a political party. And curiously or interestingly, if you've got an answer to these to one or two of these questions, the answer allows you to carry that to other questions, right? To other questions. So, I would attempt maybe 2 or 3 of those, and you will find that you then have paragraphs for the remainder of the essays. Right? Are we good so far? We're all doing well. Yes, fantastic. Joe, sorry, has asked the question: can you speak about leaders from divisions and changes from former parties? Yes, you can. So in a division within Labour, I would certainly talk about the divisions that exist economically between New Labour and Old Labour, for example. Right, I would do that. Yeah, good. Yeah, there's a good question here from Vanya, and I should have said this. Should I talk about the Liberal Democrats? Yeah, I would say if you get a question about the major parties, I think just mention the Liberal Democrats once, because that's all they deserve, quite frankly. They're not a major party, but the exam board regards them as a major party. So I would just make reference to them. I think in your answer, I wouldn't go to town. I wouldn't say to talk about them in each paragraph. I would make reference to the Liberal Democrats and one of their policies, for argument's sake, right? So, for example, if you did that Gaza paragraph, you would say something like, "The Liberal Democrats is probably one of the only mainstream parties that has called for an outright ceasefire," right? So you could get a question about, and you could about major parties and the differences between them, and you can bring the Liberal Democrats in that. Good. Um, Fantastic. Right. Let's talk about voting behavior and the media. Someone's asked, how do I access the PowerPoints? I will show you where they're available. But you can, probably the best place to get them is my book on Amazon, and then you can get them for component 1 and component 2, right? You would never get. I don't think you look. If you got a question on the Liberal Democrats alone, I would just go home, pack my bags, and go home, because there's nothing to write about the Liberal Democrats. If that does happen, don't pack your bags. But I don't think you'll get a direct question on the Liberal Democrats. It doesn't make any sense to ask a question just on the Liberal Democrats. So don't worry about that. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Fantastic. Right. Yeah, some funny points coming through on the questions. Okay, right. Let's look at some of the past questions for voting behavior. Using the source, evaluate the view that the outcomes of general elections are stable and predictable. There was a question there. There was a question about age and media have now replaced social class and region. There was about influence of the media again, and then another question on the media, not pressure groups that have a greater influence on government. So there's a crossover question. Question here about the 97 general election. It was the governing party that won it that lost it, rather than the opposition that won it, or whatever the question. So it's about who won it. Did they win it or did they lose it in 97, right? The only time they can ask you about a specific year would be the 97 question, because 97 is in the spec. Any other, you've got to learn 3 elections. They can't ask you about the 79 election directly or the 2010 election directly. They can only ask you about the 97 election. Now, because they've asked for 97 here, I don't think they'll ask it again. Yeah, I don't think you'll get a 97 election again. But remember, you do have to talk about the 97 election somewhere in your essay, because you've got to talk about 3 elections. One before 97, the 97 election, and then one after 97. Does that make sense? Yeah, Margaret's asked the question: is it recommended to know all of the elections, including the 2017? No, you just need to know 3 elections. That's it, right? And that's that's it. So you just need to know 97 and 2 elections either side, right? So what sort of questions come? I think this is a good question. Evaluate the view that party policies and manifestos have little impact on the outcome of elections. Now, to answer these questions, I would always do it by elections. I know some teachers would say, well, that's a bit basic, but I think it's the best way to do this, right? Um, so I would answer it by election. So I would do 90, 97, 2019, 79, whatever your elections are. I would do that. And in each election, I would say, did the party manifesto matter? Paragraph, half the first paragraph. Or did in 2019, for example, did other factors matter? So I would always do it manifesto as one half of the paragraph versus all of the other factors that may have affected the outcome of that election. I would always do it like that, right? And some of you quite like this question. That's good. So that's really good to see. The reason why I would do it by elections in Mabit Good is that it's just easy and it makes life much more easier for you. Like you don't want to complicate matters in an exam. And if you do it by elections, now what's the downside by doing it by elections? If you do it by elections, you've got to make sure you compare elections as you go along. So make sure when you talk about the 2019 election, you make reference to 97, make reference to 79, for example, right? So don't just talk about one election in a silo. Talk about elections together. I think that's the way to do it. That's how I would do it anyway. Yes. Good. How are we doing so far? Right. Yeah, so for example, so someone has said, I would talk about manifestos and then talk about other factors, and the other factors would be social factors like class and age, and geography, education. I would talk about those sorts of factors, right? So that's how I would do that. Right. Another question. Evaluate the view that election campaigns are decisive in determining the outcome of elections. So again, it's about the campaign rather than the manifesto. So I would do the campaign in 2019 or 2017 versus the other factors that impacted the outcome of the elections, right? And then I would do that for all three of the elections, right? So again, I think it's a really good question, yeah, I would say that. Right. Evaluate the view that the economy and economic policies of a party determine the outcome of elections. Now, this may sound like a crossover question, but actually, in the specification, they do have a bit at the end about economic policies determining the outcome of elections, right? So you got to know about, do people vote, in other words, according to the economy? And I would say, by the way, most polling suggests that when it comes to election time, the economy matters a lot. And most polling suggests that even if there are other issues at stake, the economy is always one of the most important factors. In other words, do people feel poorer? And if they feel poorer, they're going to vote for the opposition party. If they feel richer, they're generally going to vote for the party in government. Now, that's not a general rule because sometimes it doesn't work out like that, but it can work out like that. And we've seen that on a number of occasions, right? So I would probably talk about economy and economic policies and then counter it with other factors, as I said. 2010, 79 and 97 would work quite well. But you always have to talk about 97. This question has come up on multiple occasions. So I would put it down my list, but of course it can come up again. So I would probably work on that. So my best bet are these questions here, right? There are 3 questions that we've looked at. I think the media one, they've asked it 3 times already. Could it come up again? They certainly can. I would have said last year, by the way, that no, they can't ask the media question again, but they did, right? So you have to bear that in mind. But yeah, fair enough. Okay. Do campaigns start when an election is called? Yes. So a campaign only formally begins once you've got the dissolution of parliament, right? And the dissolution of parliament normally takes place around 6 weeks before before the general election date. So, for example, if this year, if we were to argue that, I don't know, elections will be in mid-October, then you would imagine in September, when party season begins, when conference season begins, they would announce the election, say at the Conservative Party conference. So I think that's probably right. Now, with elections, I have got, so they have asked, what have they asked so far? They've asked a question here about referendums. I sort of predicted that last year, actually. I said there probably will be a question about referendums in elections. And in fact, I predicted this question word for word. So I was quite chuffed with that. But they can ask it again, but but they asked it last year, so they probably wouldn't do that. I think elections are quite easy to do once you know the electoral systems, right? So I'm going to skip elections a little bit, but it's a standard. You just got to know about PR. You've got to know about first past the post. You've got to know about how these systems work, and you've got to know about the outcomes of these systems. And if you revise those, you will be in a safe place. It's hard to predict, by the way. I mean, I did that. I got that right. But apart from that, it's very hard because, to be honest, they can only ask questions, like repeat questions on first past the post on PR. Now, it's worth saying, by the way, that they've got rid of SV for as an electoral system. It's still in the specification, but it's no longer a electoral system. So if you get a question about, evaluate the electoral systems used in the UK. So this sort of question, evaluate the view that the different electoral systems used in the UK all lead to different electoral outcomes. You can still use SV. You can still use it, and there's no harm in using it. But I would suggest that you would probably have to say it's no longer applied in the UK because of mayor elections. It was in 2022 that they got rid of it in the Elections Act. Thank you, Eliza. Actually, the Elections Act, fantastic. So yeah, I think that first past the post and PR, just make sure you revise those well. There are some good model answers on my website, so you can have a look at those in that section. What is it called? The essay section on my website. Let's look at some. So that's it. So I'm going to go into now ideas, political ideology, political ideas. But before I do that, and before I get the PowerPoint together, do you have any questions on that? Any questions on that? So I'm just going to wait because I know there is a delay. So I shall wait for some things there. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just working out where my political so yeah, carry on with your questions while I just get my political idea slides up. My apologies. Yeah, here it is. Just give me a second. Should I be writing flashcards? Someone's just put on the screen. I wouldn't do flashcards, really. I would just be writing essays at this stage, or writing essay plans. I wouldn't do flashcards at this point because they're not really that useful, I have to say. I mean, I've never been a great believer in flashcards for revision purposes. I would suggest. Yeah, sorry, I'm just struggling to find my. I should have actually put all these together beforehand. I'm just finding my political ideas. Let me search for it. Ideas. Here we go. Here it is. Brilliant. Right. Okay, let me just get rid of something. And yes. Right, let me just share the screen again. So present. Stop that. So let me present again and present share screen and window, and here we go. Right. Okay. Can you see? You probably can see now my political ideas slide, and this is what I did at King's College. So brilliant. Okay, so I'm just having a look at some of your questions. For questions which are about something being the most important factor, how would you structure them? So yeah, I would say that, look, the way I would structure them, say the media is the most important factor uh, uh, to determine the outcome of elections. So I would talk about the most important factor first, and then I would counter it with other factors in my paragraph. Most important versus the other factors in my paragraph. That's how I would probably do that. Yeah. Good. Right. Let's talk about political ideas. Now, I think political ideas you can get two political ideas simultaneously. So let me rephrase that again. You can get one political idea that comes up, and they may do that this year. So, for example, they may have a liberalism come up twice. So, liberalism could come up as a single political idea, and so you get two questions on it in Edexcel. So I would say that you've got to be careful with political ideas. Don't not revise a single political idea because you think you're going to you feel that, it's going to be one out of two ideas. You may be shocked that they may come up with, with a question on liberalism twice, two liberalism questions, right? Or two on socialism, on two on conservatism. You've got to revise all of the political ideas, I would suggest. Now, um, I would say the following about political ideas. When I'm going to give you a very general point first, like almost mandatory, what you've got to revise, and then we can get into the weeds of this. I would say they haven't yet asked a single question about human nature in any three of the ideas. So you've not had human nature and conservatism, you've not had human nature and liberalism, you've not had human nature and socialism. So that means you should revise as a priority all of the human nature questions. So you should revise the question on, to what extent do conservatives have a common view of human nature? To what extent do liberals, and to what extent do socialists have a common view on human nature? I would do that as a priority. So before revising any other sort of point, I would do that as a priority, I think. Yeah. So human nature, right? That's your first sort of my first hunch. And you'll be laughing. If you revise those three and human nature comes out in one of those ideologies, you're done. You've got a third of your essay, your exam paper has now been covered, right? A third of it has now been covered. So yes, right. So apart from human nature, you could get a conservatism and economy question, right? Yeah. So make sure you revise conservatism and the economy. And I've got quite a long answer to that. In fact, I'm going to flag this up because I think it's a difficult answer, and there aren't enough. The textbooks are terrible when it comes to the conservatism and the economy. So I'm just going to put this on the screen, and you can read this in your own time. So there are agreements on property, there are agreements on the free market, there are disagreements on the social obligations of property, there are disagreements on the free market. So this will be enough, actually. This will be enough to answer this. But then I talked about welfare. There are disagreements on welfare, and that was a long section on welfare. But I think these four would be enough. So you could decide that you want to talk about welfare instead of one of the other sections, and that's perfectly fine as well. And disagreements on welfare as well. So that's probably how I would do that. So I've just flagged that up from you. Now, you can get these slightly outlandish questions which can come up in an exam. To what extent do conservatives agree on the idea of paternalism? Look, if you don't know what paternalism and how to answer it, just just revise it. Let me shut this window. Give me a second. Again, it's a bit cold out there. Yeah, so you can get a question on paternalism. You can even get a question on something like this pragmatism. To what extent is pragmatism the defining idea of conservatism? That's a tough question, I have to say, but I've sort of worked out an answer to that question. Yeah, and yeah, there was a state question last year, actually. So conservatism and the state has already come up. So this is a question. Yeah, funnily enough, we revised this question last year, and it did come up. But my best bet is on human nature and one of the three ideologies, right? Socialism. I feel that, as I said, human nature can come up on socialism, so you can get a human nature question. You could also get a state question on socialism. So the attitude towards the state. You could get a question on are socialists committed to equality? So that's another question that you've got to revise. And yeah, I don't think this would come up, to be honest, but I did try to find an answer to it. It's a tougher question. To what extent do socialists differ on the notion of collectivism? Right. So that could come up. Right. Good. I should have looked at some of your questions. Yeah. So, I mean, the way I write ideologies answers, by the way, is I suggest do an introduction, make a judgment in your introduction. Do they agree or they disagree largely on the issue? And then write a paragraph or two on agreements and a paragraph or two on disagreements. I would probably do it like that. Yeah. I don't think there's a hard and fast structure, but I would do agreements paragraphs and I would do disagreements paragraphs. And throughout your essay, I would always make reference to my judgments. I would say, so this proves that they agree more than they disagree, or this proves that they disagree more than they agree. That's, I think, how I would do this, because I think that's an easy one. Oh, my teacher says that socialism and human nature is too complicated for them to do. No, I don't think so. I mean, socialism and human nature is actually quite straightforward, dare I say it. So I feel that you should be able to answer that question. Yeah. In fact, I have got a socialism and human nature answer on my YouTube site. So go to my YouTube site. There is actually YouTube page. There is actually an answer to that socialism and human nature question. So you can have a look at that. Excellent. Good. Yeah. Yeah, but the AO3, Bethany, comes from showing agreements and disagreements, right? So showing that you've got agreements and then you've got disagreements, right? So, I would say as long as you've got disagreements, a mixture of agreements and disagreements, I think you'll be fine. Um, uh, yeah. So does it not ever coming up necessarily mean that it's more likely and we will get an overall divisions question? It seems every year it's one of the two questions. So I didn't quite get that, Joey. Sorry. I thought I understood your question, but I didn't quite get it. But if you're saying, it's come up if the question hasn't come up before, is it more likely to come up? Yes, I think it is. Yeah. Is it possible that they would repeat a question? Of course it is, but they haven't yet repeated a single question, as far as I remember, for any of the political ideas. Yeah, they haven't yet done that. Oh yes, and Nora has been putting up a lot of good essays on my website. So Nora is my fantastic helper. So you can have a look at Nora's well, I can't speak anymore. Nora's essay. That's what I'm sure that's what they call it, essays. Right. Yeah. Again, that's a possible question. To what extent do socialists differ on the importance of workers' control over the economy? Possible. It's a possible question. So do make sure you revise it. And I did that in my King's College revision day. We did go through this. It's a tougher question, I have to say, but it can come up. So be aware of that. Okay, liberalism. I feel that, as I said, a human nature question can come up. Liberalism and the economy has not come up yet. Let me just double check that. So I'm just doubting myself now. Where are we? Yeah, it hasn't. There was sort of this, yeah, exactly. They had this thing about society rather than the economy. And then they had a general liberalism, liberals, modern versus classical liberals. Oh, I should have said with socialism, only stick to the prescribed socialist grouping. So stick to revolutionary socialism, democratic socialism, and the third way. Only talk about those three. Don't talk about the other forms of socialism you may have come across in your textbook, because that's useless, and an example doesn't want to do that. And the same with liberalism. Only talk about modern liberalism and classical liberalism. There's no need to talk about early modern and late classical. None of that stuff really matters. So don't do that. Don't talk about those bits. Yeah, how are we doing so far? Everyone okay? So with liberalism, as I said, there could be a human nature question. There can be an economy question. And let me just remind myself. Yeah, they had a state question already, so state will possibly not come up. But you could get that. You could get this question. It's a far off chance, but to what extent do liberals differ on the concept of individualism? So that can come up as well, right? So I probably went through that too quickly. So a human nature question, an economy question. To what extent do liberals differ on economy? I don't think a state question will come up. An individualism question may come up in liberalism. Right. So these are my predictions for the exam. I hope you've taken some notes as we went through this. So now I'm going to entertain some Q&A from you. By the way, I do want to say the following. Yeah, this is probably worth flagging up. So with liberalism, these are our three liberal classical thinkers, and these are our two modern thinkers, right? So these are classical, these are our modern. Yeah. For socialism, which is a little bit more tricky, I would say, but for socialism, I would go with the following, and I did check this with the exam board. These two are so Karl Marx and Engels and Rosa Luxemburg are revolutionaries. Beatrice Webb is actually not it doesn't fit into any of the categories. She's not a social democrat, right? So you don't have to talk about Beatrice. Well, should talk about if you can, but remember you only need to talk about two thinkers. Crossland is our social democrat, and Giddens is our third way, right? So third way, social democrat, Webb doesn't fit anywhere, and these are our revolutionaries. And somewhat controversially, but I'm convinced of this, Burke and Hobbes are our traditional. Oakeshott is our one nation. I believe Oakeshott is one nation. I'm convinced of that. And Rand and Nozick is our new right, conservatives. Right. So yes. Yeah, look, here we go. Here's the question. So I've just lost it. For socialism, should we do revolutionary, evolutionary social democracy and democratic socialism? Third, nope. There's no need to use evolutionary socialism. It's not in the specification, Zara. So why talk about it? Don't talk about democratic socialism because it's not in the specification. You only have to talk about social democrats, right? So yes, exactly. Beatrice Webb is a democratic socialist, not a social democrat. But you don't need to talk about that, right? In the same way, TK, you don't need to talk about feminist liberalism. No, don't do that. Yeah. As far as we're concerned, Friedan and Wollstonecraft are liberals. Yes, they are liberal feminists for sure. And you can say, you can contrast them and compare them when it comes to women's rights. But I wouldn't talk about feminism here because it's not a feminism essay. Feminism is in component two. So I can see that sometimes we do as teachers overteach it, and you don't need to do that. You don't need to talk about those, right? So you only need to talk about two key thinkers actually in any one essay. Yes. Okay. I think Oshot is one nation. Yeah, I think Oshot is one nation. Uh, yeah, I'm just looking through these questions. Right. I'm just now. So I'm going to take now some general questions from you if you've got them. Now, some Geo has said Oakshot is a traditional. I know some people say he is. I mean, what I did to work out Oakshot is I went to I consulted some university professors, philosophy professors, and they convinced me that Oakshot is a one nation. I haven't actually. I should have written to the exam board, so it's probably a bit too late for that. I did write to the exam board about Beatrice Webb, and they said Beatrice Webb is not either any of them. So why did they put her in? You know, go figure. Disraeli is not a main thinker. No, you can't. You can talk about Disraeli, but you've got to talk about two thinkers on our lists. So you can't say use Disraeli in and not use the others. Yeah. Yeah, the exam board is fairly stupid. Yeah, I think you're probably quite right there. Thank you. Right. So how are we doing? I'm just going to check my stream. Oh, we still got 300 watching. That's fantastic. That's good to hear. Um, so these are my predictions. I've basically told you what I think you should focus on. I hate to use the word predictions because I don't want to be sued by anyone. Firstly, but also they're not really these are my educated guesses, right? So I can't say for sure, but I would focus on these essays. I think we have probably covered around 15 essays that you should focus on for your exam. So my view is that you should be prepared for all of those essays, and I feel that if you prepare for all of those essays, you're in a good position for your component one exam. I let me put it like that. Like, I can't say for sure, I can't say any one of them will come up, but I would say you're in a fairly good position for that. Now, lots of people have asked me about where I can get access to this PowerPoint. I'm afraid I can't give you access to this PowerPoint for a number of reasons, and primarily because it would be unfair on all those people who've been attending my webinars from the very beginning, or who've accessed my stuff, or bought because basically this is my textbook, or not my text, my revision guide. So it would be probably a little bit unwise for me to send you these PowerPoints. I'm sorry about that, right? But let me tell you where you can get access to some of this stuff. So, firstly, my revision guide. Look, if you feel you don't, I'm not telling you you have to buy this, and I'm really sorry. I don't want to I'm very bad at selling, and I don't want to sell to you, right? But I would say if you want good quality essay plans, I would probably get this. It's a bestseller on Amazon, by the way, in one of the categories. It's a bestseller. So it's I think it's doing well, but I think this is probably a good resource to have for component one and component two UK plan essay plans. I would probably do that, get that. Also, if you want to get access to my webinars, so I hope you can see this. Sorry, I'm just going to make sure that, yeah, you can. Right. So I've got this. Probably these are quite good. The revision days. So for those of you who didn't attend my King's College revision days, these two would be quite good. So this is my UK politics paper one revision day, and this is my political ideas revision day. And you would download all the slides if you access these, and also you would have access to all the videos. I think those two companions is probably what you need, one or the other. You don't have to buy all of it. Either it's a book. If you think you reading it is sufficient, buy the book, and that's enough. If you're stuck for plans and detailed plans, if you want to listen and watch something, then I think these are probably quite good resources to have for your exam. Yes, that's good. Right. So I'm going to switch this light off because it's making me blind. Um, yeah, people are saying, buy it. Please don't share the passwords. I'm trying to make a living a humble living out of this. So I would really appreciate it that you don't share the passwords. I do change the passwords from time to time as well, but that's where I'm. So I actually don't teach full time anymore. I do this full time. So between January and the exam, that's where I sort of I work and get everything done, and then I can do other things. I can jet set around the world in my other days. Yeah, no worries. I mean, I'm not saying you have to buy this. I think just focus on these essays. That's my thing. And Hala, no, I will ban you, Hala, if you ask for the passwords. Anyway, good. Uh, thank you, Kay. Thank you, Kay. I'm so impressed with your moral backbone. That's what we need today from young people. Some level of ethical backbone. I'm impressed with that. Right. So I'm not doing component 2 now, but I do think an EU question is due. So if you want an answer to an EU question, do that. So I should have said, and I haven't put it up on my website yet because I have been really busy. But on Wednesday the 29th of no, it's not Wednesday the 29th because that would be too late. On Sunday the 20th. Oh, I'm confusing myself now. Yes, I think it's. I'll give you the date later, but it's Saturday the 25th. I think it is. I'm going to be doing a whole day's revision session on component 2. So that's where we go for flag up the questions. So it's similar to my King's College event. We flag up the questions, but also that's where I give you detailed plans and answers to these questions. So we're going to do that in half term. So the first Saturday of half term. That's what I'm not doing predictions for paper 2 or 3 today, because we'll be here for another 3 hours if we do that today. So yeah, I'm not going to do that today. Um, but that's it. So I am. So for those of you who want to know more about global politics, I should have said on my website I have been doing these global politics, which I will finish off for those of you who attended it. Let me just show you these. So you go to 2024, and then you will see global. So I did 4 lessons on global politics here, so you can access those lessons, and they're pretty good, I think. And there are 2 or 3 more, well, 4 more lessons left, and I'll probably do. I am going to start those very soon. So just bear with me because I've been mega busy on all sorts of projects, but I'm going to start those soon. Right. Yes. So what else have we got? Are you guys okay? Do you have uh, yes, I structure 24 marks differently to 30 markers. Certainly I do that. So I will do a separate session in half term on component 2 predictions, and I will do a separate session in half term on component 3 predictions. Can I suggest that I know this may sound a bit problematic, but I wouldn't be working on global certainly now. I think work on component 1 and a bit of component 2, but don't work on 3, because you got a number of weeks before global USA, sorry. So you don't have to work on those now, but I will be doing a global session, and I will be doing a UK component 2 session as well. The way I do, someone's asked about 24 markers. The way I do 24 markers is I do an introduction, I do a agreements paragraph or paragraphs, and then I do disagreements paragraphs or paragraph or paragraphs, and then I do a conclusion. That's how I do it. Yeah. Someone's asked, how do you move from an A to an A star? I would watch if you watch my webinar on my YouTube page, if you watch that webinar on how to answer a 30-mark question, then I would suggest that I give you some really good tips on how to bring in sophisticated analysis. I think the key to getting an A star is good quality analysis and good quality examples. That's how you get an A star. Yeah, that's how I would do it. Yeah, the 2023 slides on my site. Yeah, yeah. So they're actually quite good. So they would be they're all online, and you can access my you can access all of my component 1 and component 2, I think. No, it's just component 1 and separately component 2. Yeah, that's not bad actually. Yeah, the 2023 slides. They're slightly dated because the examples aren't current. A lot of I've updated the current slides to reflect those newer examples, like Gaza, for example. But you can look at them in your own time. KCL was very good for politics. It is. I did go to KCL. Right. I think then we are nearly ending here. So I hope you guys are good. I think we've done quite well here. Some of you are still saying you're so cooked. Why are you so cooked? Is that because you feel that you haven't put in enough revision? Yeah. Can we write Free Palestine in the exam? I hope you do, but I don't think you'll get many marks for it. And maybe it's slightly problematic to do that. But hey, if you want to be revolutionary, maybe you should. Yes, good. Okay, you won't get a franchise question. Like you won't get a question on the history, like the suffragette stuff and all of that. You won't get that. Theresa May defecting to Labour? No way. That's not going to happen. I'm not sure. I don't think that's going to happen. The live will stay up, so you can access the live later on your on the thing. I don't do US politics, I'm afraid, so that's fine. All right, good. Look, I'm finished here. So if you join me late, just go back on the timeline and you can access some of the questions that I've flagged up today. Yeah. So there was a question there. Am I airing you? If I knew what that meant, I sort of do know what that means. Could an EU question? I said that. I answered that. Yes, it can come up. An EU question in component 2, in paper 2. Yeah, of course it can come up. Like how the UK is doing now. They've left. Yeah, that can come up. It won't be how the UK is doing by its left. It'll be about sovereignty and the EU. That's the only real question you can get. Like leaving the EU has returned sovereignty back to the UK. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. Harry, you want me to marry you? Harry, I'm afraid I can't take these sorts of very personal proposals on YouTube. Uh, uh, yeah, last time Jao I can't talk about evolutionary socialism. You can mention it, but evolutionary socialist isn't a term that's used on a specification. What's used on a specification is social democrats. Use the term used on a spec. Social democrats, revolutionary, third way. That's the term on the spec. So why waste space doing talking about evolutionary socialism? I mean, you can mention it. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but examiners did say in one of the examiners' reports that they didn't quite like it that students spent so long on parts of socialism or liberalism that weren't on the spec. Yeah. How do you jump from a C to an A? You jump from a C to an A by writing lots of essay questions between now and your exam. That's how you jump from a C to an A. I mean, that's how you do it. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm repeating myself. I am going to do a paper 2-1, but I'll do it during the half term. Right. Okay. Pressure groups do not include think tanks and lobbyists. Think tanks and lobbyists are separate to pressure groups. They're not the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Harry. That's very nice to hear. Is Boris Johnson still president? Yes, he is. Yeah, he is. So just make sure you write that in your exam, A1 times 3. I think you do really well if you write that in your exam. Yeah, I don't do nationalism, so this is not about component two. Um, yeah, fantastic. Okay, right, guys. I think we've come to the end here in more ways than one. So I'm now going to close this thing. Do follow my Substack because I will be sending out some reminders over the next few days. Um, you know, I may send something out on Substack, and if there's like a burning question that requires a live the day before the exam, I may do something the day before the exam, but I may just look at one or two questions in a little bit more depth. Okay. So I may do that. Right. Good luck to you all. All the best. Tell me how it goes after your exam. I may put up a thing on my Substack so you can leave some comments. And of course, I still do new stuff on my Substack, news stuff, but I haven't done it for a while. I'll be honest with you, but I need to do that between now and your exam. Yeah, I may do that. Okay, good. Rahmo, it's good to see you, and everyone else. And I hope you do very well, and make sure you spend the next few days revising and writing essay questions. See ya. Bye.